My wife told me she was having dinner with the boss that night. He said it was important, that maybe a promotion was on the cards. He looked me in the eyes with the same tranquility with which he said, "I love you," before going to sleep. A light smile on her lips, new perfume, a dress that she only wore on special occasions. I wanted to believe it, of course I did. That's what we do, isn't it? We trust, even when something inside us screams that something is wrong. But that scream, that night, was a roar. I couldn't keep quiet. I waited for her to leave, and followed her from afar, with my heart racing and the trembling hope that I was just being paranoid. But it wasn't. She parked a few blocks away from the restaurant, and it didn't take long for him to arrive. That boss. I saw the way she lit up when she saw him. It was no ordinary greeting. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment for weeks. They entered the restaurant like a couple in love, and I remained in the car, motionless, as my stomach burned. When they left, more than an hour later, there was no longer any room for doubt. She leaned her body against his car, and he held her by the waist as if he owned her. They kissed right there, under the yellow light of a streetlight. And I, on the other side of the street, raised my cell phone and captured everything. Every second. I could have screamed, crossed the street, made a fuss. But no. Something in me broke silent. I returned home with the image of that kiss torturing me. His hands on her back, her closed eyes, the way she gave herself to me like she never gave herself to me in weeks. During the way back, only one thought dominated me, showing this photo to those who really mattered. My children. Her family. Because betrayal isn't just between two people. She destroyed a trust that took us years to build. And everyone needed to know. The next morning, I sat everyone down in the living room. My children, still drowsy, looked confused. Her family, her parents, her brother, her cousin who kept saying that marriage was a sacred thing. I didn't say a word. I just projected the image on the living room TV. The photo. The kiss. Betrayal, crystallized in pixels. The silence that filled the environment was so dense that it seemed to cut the air. She arrived minutes later, smiling, carrying fresh bread. When he saw everyone there and the photo on the screen, he dropped the bag on the floor. The smile disappeared in seconds. The look of a woman who knew there was no more hiding anything. "Is that it?" asked her father, in a deep voice, looking at his daughter as if he didn't recognize her. One of our children stood up slowly, eyes teary, and said, "So that's why you've been smiling so much lately." She tried to talk, justify, cry, but no one wanted to listen. For the first time in years, she was exposed. Undressed. Alone. But what no one expected was what came next. Because the image wasn't just about marital betrayal. It was a trigger for a series of buried truths, masks falling one by one. The woman who everyone thought was perfect, the dedicated mother, the exemplary wife, turned out to be someone who had been leading a parallel life for longer than anyone could imagine. The boss? He wasn't just her superior. He was her best friend's husband. The woman who was at our daughter's party 2 months ago, who took photos next to my wife, laughing, toasting, saying we were an inspiration. Her best friend, who considered her like a sister, who shared confidences, pains and childhood stories. Betrayed. Doubly. The revelation fell like a bomb. And like every explosion, it generated waves. The friend found out the same day, through social media. Because, yes, the image went viral. I didn't publish it, but someone in the room took a photo of the photo. And when you hurt someone who just wanted love, who just wanted truth, you can't control the consequences. The friend tried to take her own life that same night. She was barely saved. Hospitalized. And my wife, my ex-wife, not only lost her marriage. She lost her best friend, her reputation, her children, her family's admiration, and her position within her own company. "You destroyed everything," I told her, in our last conversation before the divorce. She looked at me with real but late tears. I just wanted to feel alive again, she replied. As if my emotional death was the fair price for her vitality. She thought she was in control, that she could play with hearts like swapping pieces on a board. But you forgot that every action has a reaction. And hers was overwhelming. The boss, now exposed, had his career ruined. The company opened an internal investigation. They discovered that this case was not the first. There were others, and his wife, the betrayed friend, decided to sue him for emotional and moral damages. A legal and social avalanche befell them. And she found herself alone, rejected by everyone, and even had to deal with a revelation that was perhaps the most painful: her own children no longer wanted to talk to her. The oldest one said to me days later, "Dad, I loved her. But I can't forgive. Because she didn't just betray you. She betrayed us." And that's it. When someone cheats, it's not just a heart that breaks. It is a chain of trust, of history, of legacy. And no matter how much they try to put the pieces together, some things never go back to the way they were before. Over time, the pain gave way to silence. A heavy silence, full of memories. But also, a silence that made space for something new. Something I never imagined I could feel again. Because in the middle of the ashes, someone appeared. Someone who didn't want to take anyone's place, but who taught me to see life with different eyes. And I was reborn. But the most unbelievable thing of all was not the kiss, nor the humiliation, nor the tears. That's what happened on the day of the final divorce hearing. One last truth came to light. One that changed everything again. A turn of events that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. And that's when I understood, sometimes, the worst thing about betrayal is not what it destroys, but what it reveals. Because the traitor is not always who he seems. And the most innocent can carry the cruelest secret. But this secret, this one, only came to light when everything seemed to be over. And he was able to completely transform the ending of the story. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, encourage or romanticize any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, created with the aim of showing how much betrayal destroys lives, families and trust. Let them serve as reflection, not inspiration. Get ready now, because what you're about to hear is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Good story. In a quiet neighborhood of large houses and ancient trees, where the well-kept gardens seemed to compete with each other for perfection and the neighbors greeted each other with routine smiles, lived the couple Daniel and Laura. They formed what many would call an enviable duo, beautiful, successful and apparently in complete harmony. Daniel was a man with a sober posture and restrained speech, a civil engineer with a solid career, respected in the professional world for his commitment and integrity. He spent his days managing projects and teams, and his nights, until recently, he dedicated to his family with a silent, almost devotional zeal. Laura was communicative, always surrounded by friends, endowed with a natural charm and a striking presence. An organizational psychologist, she had built a relevant name in the corporate sector, which earned her a recent promotion that required more travel, dinners and appointments with high-ranking executives. Married for 14 years, they had 2 teenage children, Lucas, 16, introspective and with an artistic sensitivity inherited from his mother, and Sophia, 13, extroverted, with an easy laugh and a sharp heart. The family home was a home of laughter and well-established routines, based on memories built from the birth of the first child to the present, full of framed portraits on the stairs and memories recorded in small objects kept with affection. It was there that, on Friday nights, the aroma of popcorn mixed with the sound of movies on the living room sofa, and on Sunday mornings, Laura would appear in an apron, preparing pancakes while Daniel read the newspaper and the children fought lightly over the last spoonful of honey. The relationship between Daniel and Laura had always been balanced, even though they contrasted in personality. He was reserved, careful with words, driven by logic and the desire for predictability. She is spontaneous, intense, with a constant thirst for new things. At first, this attracted them as polar opposites, generating a living connection, made of mutual admiration and curiosity. Daniel was enchanted by the way Laura saw the world, while she found in him the security she never had in her youth. Over time, however, the differences stopped being a bridge and became a subtle, almost imperceptible, but growing distance. Laura began to feel swallowed up by the domestic routine, by the invisible weight of constancy, by the feeling that she had become more of a mother and wife than a woman. Even though he loved his family, there were times when he would look in the mirror and see a blurred reflection, as if part of himself was blurry. Daniel, on the other hand, found an almost spiritual kind of comfort in the predictability of the life they had built. For him, the absence of conflicts was proof that they were on the right path. Stability was his love language. The absence of questions, your way of trusting. In the last 2 years, after Laura's promotion, corporate dinners have become more frequent. Daniel always supported her, even encouraging her to accept the new position, even if it meant less time together. He wasn't the jealous type. On the contrary, he believed that demonstrating trust was essential to maintaining mutual respect. And Laura leaned on that, even though, in moments of solitude, she questioned whether that trust was a lack of attention. She wished he wanted her more intensely, that he fought a little for her, that he noticed her absences with more discomfort. But Daniel, stuck with the idea of not being invasive, walked away without realizing it. In the workplace, Laura was seen as a strong and independent woman. Her colleagues admired her for her intelligence and posture, and she began to stand out in strategic meetings, especially alongside the new executive director, an articulate man, with whom she shared professional views and some more intimate conversations at the end of the day. The two developed a connection that seemed to go beyond formality. Daniel, in turn, spent more time with his children, delving into household responsibilities naturally. For him, it was just a more demanding phase of her life. I didn't see it as an emotional departure. He still made her coffee every day, he still folded her favorite blanket on the sofa on cold nights, he still left notes in her diary with small but meaningful words. In the eyes of others, the couple was a fortress. Even their closest friends used to say that they were the kind of couple that inspires. And, in a way, this kept them connected. The image of perfection sustained a fragile stability. There were still sincere moments of affection between them. Small kindnesses, like discreet kisses when meeting in the kitchen or clasping hands during a movie. But there were also prolonged silences in the early hours of the morning, looks that strayed away, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Sophia, the more perceptive of the two children, began to notice the emptiness in her parents' gestures. Some nights, when passing by the living room, I would see my mother playing on her cell phone with a restrained smile, while my father, sitting next to me, was absorbed in reports or the news of the day. She felt like something was out of place, but she couldn't name it. Lucas, more introspective, seemed less attentive, immersed in his drawings and books. Daniel, increasingly immersed in the role of silent provider, did not notice the subtle changes in Laura's behavior. She arrived later, changed her clothes before entering the room, avoided some family gatherings with vague excuses, and always kept her cell phone with the screen facing down. Despite this, the wedding anniversary was celebrated in an elegant restaurant. A pleasant evening, with good laughs and remembered memories. It seemed that, despite the emotional gaps, there was a sincere effort to keep something alive. Daniel presented Laura with a discreet piece of jewelry, she thanked him with a tender kiss and slightly teary eyes. In the car, on the way home, they talked about plans for the future, postponed trips, old dreams, home renovations. But there was a different tone that night, as if every word was a desperate attempt to convince himself that everything was still under control. The new routine imposed by Laura's schedule was an element that already caused discomfort in some family members. Daniel's mother, an observant and direct-spoken woman, once commented, during a Sunday lunch, that Laura always seemed too busy for the family. Daniel firmly defended his wife, saying that it was just an intense phase at work and that she was giving her all. Laura, in turn, thanked the gesture with a smile, but something in her eyes said she didn't feel understood. The children, the house, the commitments, the papers, everything remained in operation, like a clock whose hands turn even when the mechanism starts to fail. The couple saw each other less often, but when they were together, there was effort, there was routine, there was a kind of undeclared pact to continue pretending that they were well enough. But deep down, they both knew something was changing. That the lightness from before had been replaced by an invisible pressure, by an discomfort that they couldn't explain. One night, after a simple dinner at home, Laura mentioned that she would have a meeting with her boss to discuss a new company strategy. He said it naturally, as if talking about something commonplace. Daniel just nodded. The way she dressed that night, the way the perfume filled the hallway before she even left, it all seemed ordinary. And yet, it wasn't. He hugged her before she left, an automatic gesture, almost formal, but full of unspoken meanings. She returned the hug with a light touch, like someone carrying a secret in her chest. That night the house seemed quieter. The children had gone to bed early. Daniel stayed in the living room reviewing some work reports, but his mind was elsewhere. Something stirred inside him, a diffuse restlessness that he couldn't name. He took out his cell phone, thought about sending a message to Laura, but decided against it. Instead, he looked at a framed photo on the shelf, the two of them on the beach, 10 years ago, smiling as if time would never touch them. And there, at that moment, something began to crack inside. But until then, nothing had been said, nothing had been done. It was just another night in which love seemed to exist, but a suffocated, domesticated love that breathed with difficulty amidst the demands of adult life. A love on hold, perhaps. The first cup of poison had not yet been poured. But the bitter taste was already beginning to form in the back of his throat. And what was to come, would forever change the fate of this family. In the week following the dinner mentioned almost casually by Laura, the atmosphere in the house already seemed different, although imperceptible to the eyes of those who weren't paying attention. The children continued with their school routines and teenage interests, and Daniel maintained the same discreet and attentive presence, but something in her gestures, the tone of her conversations, her distant gaze, revealed an absent presence, as if her body were there, but her thoughts, her soul, belonged elsewhere. The absence of visible conflicts, which was previously a point of balance, now became uncomfortable. The silences were no longer comfortable. They became dense spaces, filled with unspoken words and questions swallowed by fear. Daniel, even in his restrained posture, began to notice the small deviations, the short answers, the more frequent departures, the subtle change in perfume, in the schedule, in the glances cast at his cell phone whenever a notification vibrated. He tried to eliminate assumptions, looking for logical explanations for each change, but the justifications began to lose consistency. Laura, in turn, was restless. What was once just an exchange of glances and lively conversations with the boss turned into something more concrete. An approach that broke the barrier of professionalism and invaded the territory of intimacy. At first, it was like a subtle game, looks held for too long, smiles that said more than they should, brief touches and banal pretexts for messages outside office hours. She resisted, trying to convince herself it was just a fantasy, a passing impulse, an emotional distraction. But over time, the connection became more intense, as if that man saw something in her that Daniel had not seen for a long time, or that she believed she could no longer see. It was on a muggy Wednesday that Laura had lunch with her boss in a remote restaurant, under the pretext of strategic alignment. The reserved atmosphere, the conversation flowing naturally, the confidences exchanged, everything led to a kiss. A kiss that shouldn't have happened, but it did. And with it, the breaking of a silent pact of fidelity. From then on, something in her changed irreversibly. He returned home with his hands shaking, his heart pounding, his eyes avoiding the mirror. At night, he sat next to Daniel on the sofa as if nothing had happened, commented on the traffic, laughed at something on television. But inside, guilt was already gnawing at the corners of what was left of his conscience. In the days that followed, Laura tried to maintain her routine, but her involvement evolved. Increasingly intimate messages, carefully planned meetings, dinners disguised as meetings. Daniel, little by little, stopped finding meaning in his own certainties. I noticed the distance, her gaze always wandering, her impatience with simple questions, the absent touch in quick goodnight kisses. He tried to talk, subtly, to ask if everything was okay, if she felt overwhelmed. Laura responded with empty smiles, with, "It's just tired," or, "I'm focused on a big project." Daniel wanted to believe. He needed to believe. But the feeling of being left aside grew uncomfortable. It was on a Friday night, when Laura said she would have dinner with an important client and wouldn't return before 11, that Daniel, driven by a restlessness he could no longer control, decided to do something he had never imagined. He got in the car half an hour after she left and headed in the same direction. His stomach felt tight, his chest was on fire, but his mind was strangely lucid. I didn't have a plan, I didn't have a clear expectation, just a desperate need to know. He followed her car from a distance, keeping a prudent distance, his racing heart marking time with dull beats. Laura parked in front of a restaurant with a discreet facade, far from the busiest centers. Daniel stopped on the other side of the street, remained inside the car, watching with the engine turned off. Time seemed suspended. It was a few minutes until the man appeared. Well-dressed, confident, greeting her with a kiss on the cheek that lasted too long. The way he touched her back, the way she smiled looking straight into his eyes. It was too intimate to be professional. They entered together, hands almost touching. Daniel remained there, motionless. He tried to convince himself that he could still be mistaken, that maybe he was just reading the signs too much, imagining what wasn't there. But the body spoke another language. The warm blood rushing under your skin, the lump in your throat, the metallic taste in your mouth. Waited. The hours passed slowly. At 10:20, they left the restaurant. The man led her with his hand behind her back, like a gesture that belonged to someone who already felt entitled to touch. They stopped in front of his car, and there, without hesitation, she kissed him. A kiss that wasn't a professional goodbye. It was from someone who wanted it. A deep kiss, delivering more than any word spoken at home in the last few weeks. Daniel lifted his cell phone, almost without realizing it, and took the photo. A clear, sharp, indisputable image. The exact moment the illusion ended. He stayed there for a few more minutes, watching them laugh and walk away, each one heading to their own car. She left soon after, without noticing her husband's car parked a few meters away. Daniel, now with shaking hands, took a while to start the car. He felt betrayed in a way that hurt his bones, as if the internal structure of his body was cracking from within. He drove home slowly, with his eyes burning and his heart in pieces. Arriving home, he found his children sleeping. He passed through the rooms, careful not to make any noise, but his mind wouldn't shut up. He sat in the kitchen for almost an hour, looking at the photo, trying to find an explanation that would ease the pain. There wasn't. When Laura arrived, she acted as if nothing had happened. She left her shoes at the entrance, kissed him on the forehead, said she was exhausted. Daniel just nodded, keeping a storm inside him ready to explode. The next day, he woke up early. He spent the morning without saying a word. Laura seemed uncomfortable, asked if he was okay, and he responded with dry sentences. Until, during family lunch, with the children, her parents and her sister gathered together, Daniel got up from the table, connected his cell phone to the living room TV and projected the photo on the screen. Absolute silence. The image spoke for itself. The kiss, her body against his, the open betrayal. The impact was immediate. Laura dropped the glass on the floor, her mother covered her mouth with her hands, her father stared at her in shock. One of the children got up from the table and ran to the room, her sister got up saying, "My God, I knew something was wrong," and the atmosphere became unbreathable. Laura tried to explain, but there were no words. Daniel remained standing, motionless, as if he had frozen. She just said that everyone needed to know who she was now. And even in that chaos, in the center of the hurricane, with everyone's eyes on her, Laura knew that there was still something worse to be revealed. Because the kiss was just the beginning. And the real secret was yet to come. The house seemed suspended in time from the day the image of the kiss was projected on television in front of everyone. The everyday sounds, footsteps in the hallway, cutlery clanking in the sink, voices crossing the rooms, were gone. All that remained was a dense, cutting silence, as if the air had acquired weight. Daniel remained distant, only physically present, like a shadow of himself. The children closed themselves off in their routines, avoiding questions and looks, as if running away was a form of survival. Laura, in turn, walked through the rooms like someone who no longer belonged to that space. His presence was uncomfortable even for herself. He slept in one of the guest rooms, avoided sitting at the table, left early and returned late. It was no longer just the woman who cheated on her husband. She was a stranger. A broken figure, exiled within her own home. But even in the midst of all the pain, there was something still unrevealed, something that Daniel was beginning to suspect due to the way Laura avoided certain people, certain conversations, certain places. A discomfort that went beyond guilt. 2 weeks after the scandal, he decided to look for answers. Not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Something inside him demanded clarity. I needed to understand. I needed to know the exact size of the destruction. He looked for Laura's boss's name on the internet, researched the company, saw some photos on social media and, among the images, found one that seemed harmless, but had an immediate impact, a company dinner that took place 2 months ago, with all the executives gathered, and in the background of the photo, the boss's wife. A woman he recognized immediately. Not just for the face, but for the context. She was Laura's best friend. The same one who had attended her children's birthdays, who shared confidences, who had been to their house several times. The same one Laura said she lost contact with after a difficult phase between them. The photo was recent. And the detail that stopped him was that, in the image, she wore a ring identical to Laura's. Not just any ring, but a limited edition that they both bought together, on a weekend when they traveled alone to celebrate their 40th birthday. Daniel's pulse quickened. That couldn't be a coincidence. What once seemed like just an extramarital affair was starting to smell like something even dirtier. He picked up the phone and, on impulse, called his wife. She answered with a weakened voice. Daniel introduced himself with a dry, "It's me." She remained silent for a few seconds, then said that she already imagined he would call. And before he asked anything, she released the sentence that broke him inside, "She cheated on me too, Daniel. With my husband. And it wasn't now. It was for 2 years. 2 damn years when I shared my bed with a man in love with my best friend. You have no idea what that did to my life." Her voice shook with pain and suppressed fury. He hung up without saying anything else. There were no possible words. The betrayal had much greater proportions than he imagined. Daniel returned home in a daze. The image of Laura dancing with her friend at family parties, exchanging laughter and secrets, now seemed grotesque to her. The kiss you saw days ago was just the surface. The infidelity had deep roots, lies upon lies, and among them, the worst of all, Laura had not just betrayed her husband. She had destroyed the trust in a friendship that she herself said was the most important in her life. He had crossed the line between error and perversity. That night, Daniel waited for her in the living room. No television, no lights on, just his presence immersed in darkness. When she entered, she hesitated when she saw him there. He observed her with the coldness of someone who no longer recognizes the person in front of them. She dropped her bag on the floor and tried to maintain her composure. He asked her to sit down. With a low but firm voice, he asked when it all started. She was silent for a few seconds, then, with a long sigh, she confessed, "Since before the promotion. Since he showed up at the company. I tried to stop, but..." He interrupted, saying that it didn't matter anymore. That the time for superficial confession had passed. Then, like putting a mirror in front of a monster, he asked, "Why did you do this to her? To your best friend? Why did you destroy everything like that? Laura's face disfigured with astonishment. Did you talk to her? He asked in an almost childish tone. He nodded, coldly. And then, what she said next, it all came crashing down. Because I fell in love with him before she did. The sentence came out raw, bluntly. Because we both started before they got married. Because he promised me that one day he would be with me, but he ended up marrying her for convenience, for status. And I accepted staying aside, I accepted being the other one, believing that one day it would be my turn. When he became my boss, the story came back. And I thought, now yes. Now is my chance. But he never left her side. I became my best friend's lover, and what's worse, I encouraged her to trust me, even though I knew that I was the reason for her downfall. Daniel heard everything without saying a word. His face was livid. That went beyond adultery. It was complete emotional devastation. Laura continued talking, as if opening that wound was the only way to survive. She said that for years she lived with envy, believing that her friend had stolen the love she thought was rightfully hers. Who harbored a silent hatred, disguised as friendship. That her constant presence in her friend's life was the cruelest way of punishing her without her knowing. That when he had the chance to be with the man again, he didn't hesitate. She didn't cheat out of impulse, nor out of need. He betrayed out of a desire for revenge. For a narcissistic wound that never healed. Daniel, upon hearing that, understood that he had never met the woman he had slept with for years. That the love he shared with her was surrounded by a hidden past, by resentments that he would never imagine. He got up without saying anything, and before leaving the room, he said a single sentence: "You destroyed not only our family, but what was most human in you." He went up to his children's room and found them lying in silence. He sat on the edge of Lucas's bed, who was pretending to sleep, and ran his hand through his hair. The boy, with his eyes closed, let a tear run down the side of his face. Sophia, on the other side of the hallway, heard her father's heavy breathing and felt the air in the house increasingly unbearable. Laura remained in the room, sitting, with her eyes fixed somewhere in the void. I knew that from that moment there was no going back. There was no possible speech, no gesture of repentance capable of erasing what had been revealed. She was no longer just a woman who cheated on her husband. She was the betrayer of a sacred friendship, the lover hidden within the house, the accomplice in a sordid plot that began long before any ring was placed on her fingers. What came next was still a mystery. But the truth, now exposed, had shattered any fantasy. And in the ashes that remained, there was only room for consequences. Laura didn't sleep that night. The clock ticked mercilessly through the hours, and each tick seemed to dig deeper into the abyss beneath his feet. Sitting on the sofa in the still dark living room, she stared at the reflection in the window as if trying to recognize who the woman was there, with her sunken eyes, dull skin and tense body, as if she were about to collapse. There were no more disguises, there were no more justifications that could fit into the piercing silence that filled the house. The next morning, light invaded the room brutally. Laura got up, crossed the corridor without looking around and left. I needed to breathe away from that air saturated with disappointment and shame. He drove the car aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, as if the movement was enough to postpone the confrontation with reality. Daniel, on the other hand, remained at home. Unlike previous nights, there was no pain, no anger, no pleading. There was just an absolute emptiness. As if after the impact, anesthesia came. He got up early, prepared the children's coffee with the same automatic gestures as always, but with a look that no longer lived in the moment. Sophia watched him from the corner of her eye, trying to find signs of the father she knew. Lucas, quieter than usual, just ate in silence, immersed in thoughts that no one there would be able to guess. When they both left for school, Daniel allowed himself, for the first time in weeks, to sit at the living room table with his head in his hands. He felt he had crossed the line between the known and the irreversible. It was only late in the afternoon that Laura returned. The light was already losing power when she parked the car in front of the house. He took a deep breath for long seconds before entering. The house was silent. Daniel was not in the room. He climbed the stairs slowly, his steps echoing like hammers in his own thoughts. When she arrived at the room, she found him standing in front of the closet, closing a suitcase. She leaned against the door, her heart racing, but without the courage to say what she thought. Daniel turned around slowly. His face was serene, almost too calm. "I'm leaving the house today," he said, without raising his voice. "Not because I want to run away. But because I need to get myself together. And I need to do this away from you." Laura felt her legs give out, but she remained standing. "Please, don't leave now, not without letting me explain." He shook his head, still calm. "You explained." He explained more than I thought I would hear. "But what you told me, there's no room in here." "Not now." She approached him, hesitantly, and tried to touch him, but he backed away. "Don't do that, Laura. The last thing left between us is the minimum respect of not pretending what no longer exists." She followed him to the stairs, her voice cracking. "Are you going to talk to the boys?" "Not yet. They need time. But soon I'll need to tell the truth, at least the part that concerns them." Laura tried to say something, but the words were jumbled. He went downstairs, picked up his suitcase, and without another word, left. She remained still for long minutes, listening to the sound of the suitcase's wheels sliding along the sidewalk until they disappeared. In the days that followed, Laura was alone in the house with her children. But it was a greater loneliness than Daniel's physical absence. It was a loneliness built by layers of silence, distrust and repulsion that now separated each of them. Sophia kept her distance, sleeping with the door locked. Lucas avoided looking into his mother's eyes, and when he did, it was as if he saw a person he didn't recognize. Communication was limited to the essentials, practical questions, monosyllabic answers. Laura tried to keep the house in order, pretend to have a routine, but everything seemed out of place, as if she were living in a poorly rehearsed performance. That Friday, Daniel stopped by school and picked up his children. He took them to spend the weekend with his paternal grandparents. He said he needed to talk to them away from everything. At dinner, after dessert, he invited them to sit on the sofa on the porch. He took a deep breath, and with a care that hurt his own voice, he began to explain. He said that he had decided to separate, that the relationship with Laura had gone beyond irreparable limits, that certain truths had been discovered. Lucas kept his gaze fixed on any point on the horizon, and Sophia, after a few minutes of silence, just asked if her mother had really loved that other man. Daniel replied that this was a question that only Laura could answer, but that love does not survive betrayal without scars, and some wounds, even when healed, leave too many marks to continue in the same way. The following week, Laura received the lawyer's letter. Formal request for divorce, division of assets, shared custody of children. She sat alone at the table with the papers in front of her, and for the first time in a long time, she cried uncontrollably. Not because of the end, but because of the way it destroyed everything. Because now, faced with Daniel's absence and her children's coldness, she realized that the love she had was wasted by an obsession that she mistook for destiny. On the other side of the city, Daniel was getting back on his feet in small steps. He moved to a simpler but cozy apartment. He restarted his routine, focusing on his children and work, in an attempt to regain some peace. And it was on one of those ordinary days, as he was leaving the supermarket, that he bumped into someone he hadn't seen for many years, Helena, an old college friend, widowed for 3 years, mother of a little girl, serene smile and eyes marked by stories he didn't yet know. They exchanged contacts, scheduled a coffee. And coffee became dinner, which became a walk, which became an exchange of confidences about losses, disappointments, and new beginnings. Helena didn't ask about the past, but listened when he wanted to talk. He had a calmness that didn't pressure him, and a presence that felt good. Daniel wasn't looking for a new love. But he discovered, every day, that it was possible to feel alive again. That there was room to rebuild, even after the destruction. Meanwhile, Laura tried in vain to regain her children's trust. But they had changed. They had learned too soon that love is not immune to falling, and that trust, once broken, requires much more than repentance to restore. She continued to live in the same house, but everything there reminded her of what she lost. The photos were now put away, the family portraits replaced by bare walls. Around every corner, an echo of a past that would never return. One day, he received an unexpected visitor, his former best friend, a wife betrayed by the same man who had now also asked for a divorce. She entered without asking permission, sat in front of Laura with her eyes steady. They said little. But in the end, the friend just said, "You destroyed both of us with the same ease. But the difference is that I learned to live without it. And you're still stuck with what you tried to steal." That night, Laura saw herself in the bathroom mirror and, for the first time, saw her own ruin. Not just as a cheating woman, but as someone who tried to overcome past pain with a gun that ended up exploding in her own hands. And the silence that dominated the house that morning was that of someone who finally understands the weight of the wrong choice. Now, nothing could be the same as before. But something even bigger was about to happen. Something none of them even imagined. Because some stories, even when they seem to have ended, still have one last blow. And what would come next, would change everything again. The week Laura received a visit from her ex-friend was a silent divide, a point where past and present collided in a way she didn't immediately know how to absorb. After the woman left, with a firm gaze and words that cut like a razor, Laura remained standing in the room for more than an hour, unable to move, as if waiting for the pain she felt inside to find form, explode, invade the air like a scream, but there was no scream, there was no catharsis, just that continuous weight in her chest and a certainty that there was no one to turn to. The loneliness, until then disguised by small moments of hope, became absolute. She began to wander through the rooms of the house like a shadow, moving through old objects as if searching for some version of herself that could still be recovered, something that reminded her of who she was before everything fell apart. But all he found was the presence of absence, the void left by the people he loved and lost, the silence of his children, the absence of Daniel's touch, the echo of his own choices reflected in every bare wall. Meanwhile, Daniel continued trying to reorganize his own life with the same precision he used in his engineering projects. Divided between his children, work and emotional reconstruction, he kept his focus where he could have some control. Lucas began to show a slight approach, small comments, questions about school, quick smiles that hadn't existed for weeks. Sophia, on the other hand, remained more distant, introspective, observing everything with the eyes of someone who matured too quickly. Daniel respected her, he didn't force her to get close, but he was there, always available, creating a space of safety that she could, one day, choose to enter. And it was on a calm afternoon, during a conversation about books, that Sophia asked him, directly, if he would ever think about forgiving Laura. The question, thrown bluntly, hit Daniel hard. He remained silent for a few seconds, then replied that forgiveness and coexistence are not the same thing, and that forgiving did not mean going back, but rather moving forward without carrying the poison. Sophia nodded with a slight movement of her head, as if that answer helped her breathe a little better. On the other side of the city, Helena appeared in Daniel's life with the delicacy of someone who didn't want to invade, but little by little she became part of it. Her presence was a gentle counterpoint to the turmoil he was experiencing. They exchanged brief messages during the day, met discreetly in cafes or for walks in the park, and little by little, Daniel began to allow himself to feel again. There were moments when he felt guilty, not for being with someone else, but for realizing that, next to Helena, the world seemed to make sense again. She didn't demand, she just offered presence, listening and a silent understanding that brought her peace. And it was during one of these meetings that Helena told her about her husband's early death, about the years of adaptation as a single mother, about the silences that only those who have lost someone can translate. Daniel saw in it not a replacement, but a new chapter. And for the first time since the collapse, he felt he could write a different story. Meanwhile, Laura received the final divorce documents, the signatures pending, the terms set. He read each clause with a mixture of pain and resignation. She knew that that paper was legal confirmation of what had already been real for weeks, but seeing her name disconnected from his, from the house, from the main custody of the children, was like opening a wound that she herself had caused. He did not fight against any of the decisions, he did not challenge values, he did not ask for revisions. He signed everything on the same day and delivered it personally to the lawyer, with the look of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. On a cloudy late afternoon, Daniel picked her up for the last practical conversation, organizing the children's transition to the new visitation schedule and explaining, together, that the separation was legally final. She got into the car not knowing what to say. He offered no words of comfort, just led the way in silence. When they arrived at the square where they used to take their children when they were little, they sat on a bench and waited for the two to arrive. When Lucas and Sophia sat down in front of them, Laura tried to speak, but her voice broke. Daniel then took over, with a firm but affectionate tone, explaining that now the house would be divided between the two, that the routine would change, but that their love for their children was what would remain unshakable. The teenagers listened in silence, but something in their eyes said that despite the pain, they felt respected for being treated with the truth. When the children went for a walk alone, Laura and Daniel remained sitting on the bench. It was then that she broke the silence with a question she had been holding onto for days: "Do you love her?" He looked at her for a few seconds, then replied without hesitation, "Not yet. But for the first time, I'm not afraid to love again." She nodded, no tears, no protests. I knew he had already crossed the turning point. She looked at him with silent but true pain. "I just said I hoped he was happy." He replied that he wanted the same for her, even though he didn't know if that would be possible. And there, on that gray afternoon, the two said goodbye not as enemies, but as survivors of a war that they themselves created. And at the same time, each one left carrying with them a dilemma that would accompany them forever, that of living with the consequences of a choice that changed everything. In the days that followed, Laura tried to resume her life with dignity. He changed jobs, left the house where everything had collapsed and started living in a smaller apartment. She remained distant from relationships, focused on rebuilding herself emotionally. I attended therapy, read compulsively about losses and new beginnings, and little by little, I came to understand that regret does not erase wounds, but it can prevent new ones from being opened. I avoided thinking about Daniel, but I couldn't help dreaming about him from time to time. In his dreams, he smiled. And she always woke up with the feeling that that smile was a place she no longer had access to. Daniel moved on, but in no hurry. The relationship with Helena evolved calmly, without labels, without grandiose plans. It was a serene construction, made up of meetings that did not require promises, just presence. The children began to restructure themselves emotionally, each in their own way. Lucas started drawing more often again. Sophia started to write a diary, where she deposited her still mixed emotions. And Daniel, little by little, felt that the air was returning to his lungs without pain. And then, one day, when everything seemed to finally fall into a new rhythm, a message arrived. Short, direct, unexpected. And what she said would be the trigger for a new development. Something no one predicted. Something that would once again call into question everything that had been rebuilt. And this time, there would be no room for hiding places. Not even for excuses. Just the truth, naked and raw. And what it would bring, was still impossible to imagine. The message arrived on a clear Tuesday, when Daniel was in the office finalizing a review of a structural plan and preparing for a video call with a client. The cell phone warning vibrated silently next to the keyboard, discreetly, without fanfare, but the name that appeared on the screen froze his flow of thoughts for a second. Laura. It had been weeks since she had last attempted contact, since that day on the park bench, when everything had been said as frankly as possible. He hesitated to open it, his fingers hovering over the screen as if waiting for emotional authorization. When he finally read it, the content of the message was neither dramatic nor begging. It was dry. Cold. Contained. But strange. We need to talk. Something serious. Today. Without the boys. And right below, a new address. A modest apartment, in a lesser-known area of the city. The kind of place she would never have chosen years ago. The formality of the text, the absence of commas, even the suggested time, 6 in the afternoon, everything seemed out of tune. Daniel remained motionless for a few moments, trying to decipher the subtext of those words. There was no mention of regret, no apologies, no longing. It was an objective request, without flourishes. That intrigued him more than if Laura had poured herself out with emotions. When he arrived at the designated location, the building was simple, the entrance hall was dimly lit, and there was a smell of fresh paint mixed with old mold. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs and stopped in front of the door. It was already open, as if it had been waiting for him. Laura appeared in the doorway with an exhausted expression, her hair tied up sloppily, her face pale, her dark circles under her eyes deep. He was wearing a loose blouse and sweatpants. No trace of the woman with a striking presence he had known. Just an emptied figure. He entered in silence. She closed the door and indicated the sofa. The apartment was small, the living room and kitchen divided by an improvised counter, the decoration non-existent. There were no paintings, no photos. Just basic furniture, as if she were in a temporary place, waiting. Daniel sat and waited. She sat in the armchair opposite, crossed her arms and then uncrossed them. Finally, he took a deep breath and began. I know you've moved on. I know you found someone else. And I'm not here to try anything. I don't want to go back, nor do I expect you to forgive me. But there's one thing you need to know. And I can't carry this anymore. Daniel kept his gaze fixed on her. There was no anger. Just surveillance. When everything happened, when we were still married, it wasn't just what you discovered. There were other things. Things that happened without you knowing. And one in particular, a decision I made alone. A choice that affected not only you, but also the boys. Daniel narrowed his eyes, but didn't interrupt. A year before everything, me and him, we went on a work trip. And I found out I was pregnant. At the time, I panicked. I thought it was his. But after all, I realized it could be yours. But I didn't tell you. I didn't tell anyone. Not even for him. I took it. I did everything alone. Afraid. With shame. I couldn't deal with the possibility of having a child with someone who wasn't you. But I also couldn't live with the doubt of adding another child to a marriage that was already sinking. And after that, I was never the same. The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel couldn't react. The revelation was not just a confession of physical infidelity. It was a direct intervention in the course of the family itself, a life that could have existed and that was erased by a unilateral act. He ran his hand through his hair, got up, walked to the window and came back without saying anything. Laura watched him, curled up in the armchair like a child about to be punished. Why now? He finally asked. The voice was low but harsh. Why do you think I needed to know this now? She hesitated. Because I can't carry it alone anymore. And because, it's not fair. You always deserve to know the truth. All of her. Even if it's late. He shook his head in disbelief. This isn't about justice, Laura. This is about control. You decided I shouldn't know. And now he has decided that I must. You keep choosing for me. Even after everything. She began to cry, but he was unmoved. He just took a deep breath and grabbed the car key. Before leaving, he turned to her once more. I've already lost everything. But now you've taken away even the illusion that what was left was real. He left the apartment with firm steps. He didn't look back. When he got into the car, he didn't turn on the radio, he didn't take a deep breath, he didn't scream. He just stood there, with his hands on the steering wheel and his eyes fixed on a point of nowhere. Everything he had rebuilt suddenly seemed threatened by a new avalanche. Not because of the child who didn't come, but because of the way he was once again left out of decisions that shaped the family's history. The next day, Helena noticed the distance. Daniel couldn't fake it. During dinner, she waited for him to open up. And he told. Not everything, but enough. Helena listened to him with teary eyes. He didn't judge, he didn't interrupt. When he finished, she held his hand and said she understood that sometimes the pain doesn't come from a single cut, but from a series of small cuts that no one sees. I said I didn't know if I could help him heal from all this, but that I wanted to try to be there if he would let me. Daniel felt a gratitude he didn't know how to express. In the following days, he kept his distance from Laura. She sent a few more messages, asking him to talk to her before telling his children. He ignored it. But I knew that, at some point, I would have to decide what to do with that truth. The moral dilemma consumed him. Did the children have the right to know? Or would it be another unnecessary pain? Did he have the right to preserve this secret for them? Or would that be repeating Laura's mistake of choosing for the other? It was with this conflict burning inside that he decided to look for his therapist, the same one who had been with him since the separation. He sat before her like a man at war with himself. He exposed the facts, the feelings, the fears. And she, with the same serenity as always, said that there was no right answer. That there were only choices, and that each of them carried their own pains. But perhaps the question was not, who has the right to know? But rather, which truth liberates? Daniel left the office without answers, but with one certainty: life would no longer be the same. There was no path without pain. And there was no way to start over without accepting that some parts of the story would always be tainted. The important thing was what he would do with it now. And deep down, even without admitting it, I knew this choice was coming. And that, once again, the truth would have the power to unite or destroy. But this time, he wanted to be in control. Because for the first time, he wouldn't just be a victim. He would be the author of his own ending. The morning Daniel decided to talk to his children, the sky was gray and there was a cold breeze crossing the half-open windows of the new apartment, as if the city itself sensed that something profound was about to happen. It was not a decision made on impulse, but rather the silent conclusion of an internal process, of an emotional battle that had accompanied him since the moment he heard Laura's last confession. He knew that his children had matured in a hurry, knew more about life than they should, and yet he protected them with the hope that perhaps they could escape the total pain, the brutal truth. But truth, he understood, is not something you choose to share or not. It is something that grows, overflows, darkens the corners if it is suffocated. And he couldn't bear to be one more person to choose for them. Sophia and Lucas sat at the table as naturally as they would on normal days, plates of toast and fresh fruit in front of them, the cup of tea resting in their father's hands. The conversation started lightly, with questions about school, upcoming exams, and then, in the middle of the break between one bite and another, Daniel took a deep breath and said that he needed to tell him something that he had kept in mind until then. The silence that fell was not one of fear, but of attention. The attentive eyes of his two children were fixed on him like mirrors. Daniel spoke slowly and explained that he had discovered a part of the story between him and Laura that had not yet been revealed. He didn't say the most painful details, he didn't name every bit of the truth, but he made it clear that the betrayal they faced went beyond what had come to light at the beginning, and that no matter how hard he tried, he could no longer live with this secret alone. Lucas looked down, his fingers lightly pressing the fork, while Sophia, with teary eyes, asked if her mother knew he was going to tell her. Daniel replied no, but that this wasn't about her anymore, it was about them, about what they deserved to know, about the honesty he promised to maintain from then on. The conversation did not end with hugs or promises of immediate understanding. It ended with silence. A different silence, full of respect and the feeling that, even in pain, they had crossed another layer of darkness together. Laura found out that Daniel had told her when she received a call from Sophia 3 days later asking to meet her. They met in a small, distant cafe, and the teenager arrived accompanied by Lucas, contrary to the expectation that it would be a alone conversation. They sat in front of their mother, who seemed smaller, curled up in the chair, with her hands restless in her lap. Sophia began by saying that she now knew everything, that she finally understood why her mother had changed so much. But what she said afterwards was what broke Laura inside. "You didn't need to be perfect, Mom. We never demanded that from you. But hiding it so much, choosing alone what would affect us or not, that drove us away more than any betrayal. You didn't even trust us." Laura tried to respond, but Lucas interrupted her, without anger, just with the firm voice of someone who was no longer a boy. "We'll continue, Mom. But don't expect us to be able to look at you like before." They got up soon after, without warm goodbyes, leaving Laura there, with the cup untouched and her eyes lost somewhere on the floor. The months passed and life resumed its rhythm, but nothing went back to the way it was. Helena and Daniel made their relationship official calmly, without fanfare. She got to know her children little by little, respecting each one's time, and curiously, it was Sophia who first allowed herself to get close. He found in Helena someone who didn't try to take up anyone's space, who just listened and offered silence when necessary. Lucas was more resistant, but not hostile. There was a new serenity in Daniel, something that his children recognized as a deserved achievement. He was a man who had gone through his own storm and, instead of hardening, he had chosen to grow. Laura, on the other hand, plunged into a painful rebuilding process. He moved to an even more remote neighborhood and found a new job outside the corporate world that he previously valued so much. She started working as a therapist at an institution that supports women who have experienced profound losses. There, among stories of pain, abandonment and overcoming, he found a type of redemption that did not involve external forgiveness, but acceptance of his own error. He didn't get involved with anyone again, not out of punishment, but because he needed to learn to live with his new version, the one that no longer saw himself in mirrors or expectations, but in small gestures of surrender. He started writing letters, all without an addressee. Letters to Daniel, to her children, to herself. None were sent. But in them she rediscovered the ability to reflect without hiding. The ex-lover, in turn, did not escape the consequences. After the scandal, he faced a lawsuit filed by his ex-wife, lost his management position in the company and was transferred to an irrelevant role within the structure. He became a name avoided in social circles and ended up changing cities. They said he was trying to start over, but the type of fresh start he was looking for was different from Daniel's. It was a desperate start, from someone trying to forget what they did without actually taking the blame. The difference between the two was in the way they faced their own falls. Daniel faced it, remained standing, looked into the eyes of those he hurt and took on their pain. The other just ran away. As time passed, Laura and Daniel met one last time, by chance, outside Sophia's school. She was preparing for a theater performance and had invited them both, not knowing if either of them would accept. Both appeared. They stood on opposite sides of the auditorium, exchanging a brief look that carried neither resentment nor longing. Just confirmation that that time had passed. After the play, when they left, the two crossed paths for a few seconds. Laura was the first to speak. He said Sophia looked beautiful. Daniel smiled with his eyes. She replied that she, as a mother, had a part in this. She nodded. And, like someone who understands the exact weight of words, she said, "Thank you for telling them." It was right. He didn't respond. He just kept walking, with Helena in front and the children right behind. And so, each one found a different balance point. Some with new beginnings, some with silent endings. History did not end with reconciliations or promises of eternity. It ended with life continuing, the way it continues after pain takes over and maturity demands presence. Because in the end, what was left was the realization that betrayal doesn't just destroy marriages, it destroys identities, bonds, stories. But it also reveals. It shows who is capable of rebuilding themselves with dignity and who decides to live among ruins. If this story touched you in any way, if it moved something inside, comment below what you thought. Your opinion is very important to us. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity now to subscribe, activate the bell and not miss any of the next stories. Here we talk about hard truths, real emotions, and above all, how choices shape who we are. Always remember that this channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, created for reflection and alertness. We'll see you next time.